Some battles with neighbors start over fences or noise complaints. Others, like mine, begin with a move so bold it felt like a declaration of war. What happens when the person next door decides your property is hers to use and you're left holding the consequences? She rolled 2 heavy trucks into my garage without a word of permission, then had the nerve to file a 2000 HOA complaint against me for running unauthorized commercial activity. The mistake she made? She had no idea that garage was under lease to the county sheriff. Early Tuesday morning, right at 6 a.m., I stepped outside and saw both rigs jammed inside, their engines still ticking hot, diesel fumes hanging thick in the air, oil already bleeding into my concrete. The sharp stench of motor oil and cooling metal stung my nose as I stood there, and across the way, Brenda stared back at me from her kitchen window. Coffee mug in hand, she wore the smug grin of someone convinced she'd already won a game I hadn't agreed to play. What she couldn't see was that Deputy Martinez was due in just 2 hours to collect tactical gear. That violation notice she'd proudly prepared, soon it would serve as evidence in her own harassment case. She had no idea she'd picked a fight with someone who documents every detail and rents to law enforcement. If a neighbor hijacked your garage and then tried to fine you for it, what would you do? My name's Dale, I'm 52, and if there's one lesson I've learned, it's that most problems have straightforward answers. After 28 years turning wrenches at a Ford dealership, I know the value of patience, precision, and spotting trouble before it explodes. Still, nothing in my toolbox prepared me for Brenda. I came into this corner lot ranch house in Millfield, Texas, after my wife Sarah passed from cancer 3 years back. She was gone too soon, the bills stripped us bare, and now it's just me, Rex, my loyal German Shepherd, and a property that's worth more than I can comfortably carry. Salvation came from a place I didn't expect. The sheriff's department needed secure storage, and my detached 3-car garage fit the bill. $400 a month doesn't sound life-changing, but on a thin pension and disability checks, it's the difference between keeping a roof over my head and falling into foreclosure. Deputy Martinez has been my tenant for 18 months, stores tactical gear, emergency supplies, evidence kits, always shows up twice a week, steady as clockwork, polite and professional. The space still smells faintly of the honest grease and motor oil from my mechanic days, now layered with the metallic tang of police-grade hardware and the sterile bite of evidence chemicals. The setup works perfectly, the community benefits, and my bills get paid. But then Brenda arrived. 6 months ago, she and her husband, Chuck, a smart oil rig man who wisely spends most of his time away, moved in. She runs a landscaping business and acts like that gives her authority to manage the entire neighborhood. And from the moment she crossed the property line, trouble followed. For 11 months of the year, everything was calm. Within a single week of moving in, Brenda joined the HOA board and launched her mission to increase property values, which in practice meant making everyone miserable until they bent to her will. She owned 2 oversized trucks, a company rig stacked with mowers and mulch spreaders, and a personal pickup big enough to haul a cottage. Her driveway couldn't handle either, so instead of paying for commercial storage, she decided my property was fair game. The first real warning sign came 2 months back during her backyard barbecue. It wasn't a casual cookout, it was a full production, with catered food, a hired DJ, and enough alcohol to sink a ferry. Bass shook my windows past midnight. Around noon that day, both her trucks appeared in my driveway like they belonged there. I knocked politely, the smell of smoked meat mixing with diesel fumes already pounding in my head. "Brenda," I said, "you need to move your trucks. Deputy Martinez has a scheduled pickup this afternoon." She barely looked up from her catering table. "It's just temporary overflow parking," she said flatly. "This is my property, not a public lot," I reminded her. Her voice went icy. "Don't be so dramatic, Dale. One afternoon won't kill anyone." 6 hours. That's how long those trucks sat there while her party thundered on. When Deputy Martinez showed up for his inspection, he had to park on the street and weave past her vehicles like they were permanent obstacles. His boots crunched over gravel as he circled the long way, too professional to voice his irritation, though I could see it plain. I apologized to him 3 separate times, each one cutting deeper. It was the most humiliating moment of my retirement. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about convenience, it was about control. Brenda was proving that her priorities outweighed everyone else's, even law enforcement. And from that moment, the harassment escalated. The next week, I spotted her pacing my yard with her phone, snapping photos of every detail, like some budget detective. My garden, my fence, even Rex's doghouse ended up in her gallery. When I confronted her, she claimed it was updating neighborhood records for the HOA, all with that same cold smile. Then came the violation notice, printed on flimsy copy paper that crinkled like dead leaves. Unauthorized commercial activity detected. Cease unauthorized business operations within 30 days or face a $2,000 fine. She was attacking my lifeline. Standing with that notice in my hands, watching her smug silhouette in the window, I saw her strategy plain. This wasn't petty neighbor drama. This was economic warfare. She had studied my situation, found the weak spot, and launched a calculated campaign to cut off my income and force me to sell. Too bad for her, she picked the wrong retired mechanic to fight with. Rex growled low at my side, already reading the threat in the air. Smart dog, he knew the battle had started before I did. 3 days after that barbecue fiasco, her first official strike landed. A certified letter in my mailbox, one of those fat legal envelopes that reek of money and bad news. The sender read Millfield Meadows Homeowners Association, but I could practically smell Brenda's cheap perfume on the papers inside. The accusation? Operating an unauthorized business in violation of zoning rules. Her legal fiction claimed that the sheriff's lease was a commercial enterprise, destroying neighborhood character and harming property values. The demand? Immediate termination of the lease, plus a $2,000 penalty for ongoing violations. But here's where her plan showed cracks. She had already scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Tuesday, certain she'd cornered me. Somehow she forgot to notify me until Monday afternoon. Classic ambush strategy. Catch the target off guard and bulldoze them into submission. Too bad she picked the wrong mechanic to blindside. Saturday morning, I was at the county courthouse, breathing in the musty scent of old paper and stale bureaucracy while combing through property records. The filing room had the lifeless hush of a library where excitement goes to die. Still, dry paperwork sometimes hides dynamite. "Well, I'll be," said Martha, the clerk, adjusting her glasses as she studied my deed. "Your garage predates this HOA by 15 years. That's grandfathered use, sweetheart." She explained something I'd never even considered. When a structure exists before an HOA is formed, it gets locked in under grandfathered clauses. Translation, my rights outranked their shiny new rules. Sarah would have loved that loophole. She always said the best defense was knowing more than your enemy. But the bigger shock came when I dug into Brenda's record. City code was crystal clear. Commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds need special permits for overnight residential parking. Both her landscaping rigs smashed that limit, and she had 0 permits on file. By Tuesday evening, I walked into the community center meeting like a man holding live ammunition. The room reeked of burnt coffee and nervous sweat. 5 board members sat behind a flimsy folding table that looked borrowed from a church basement, with Brenda seated dead center like she was presiding over court. "Mr. Hensley," she began, heavy with false authority, "your unauthorized commercial lease clearly violates Section 4.3 of our residential covenant. We're prepared to impose immediate fines." "Hold it right there, counselor," I cut in, sliding my courthouse findings across the table. "That garage was built in 1987. Your HOA didn't exist until 2002. That's 15 years of grandfathered protection."
Paper shuffled, silence thickened. You could have heard a pin drop until Frank Morrison, the old postmaster who'd lived here since the dawn of dirt, broke into a chuckle. "Dale's absolutely right," he said, scanning the documents. "I remember when you built that garage. My late wife Clara even brought you lemonade during construction." Brenda's face shifted from pale to crimson to deep purple in 3 seconds flat. "That's irrelevant. Current zoning supersedes." "Speaking of zoning," I said slowly, savoring it, "let's talk Section 12.7, commercial vehicle storage in residential zones." Out came my photographs, her trucks, weight specs from the manufacturer, time-stamped evidence of them parked overnight. "Both vehicles exceed the 10,000-pound limit. You've been out of compliance for 6 months without permits." Frank slapped the table and laughed. "Well, Brenda, looks like Dale just used your own ammo against you. Maybe read the laws before you throw 'em at folks." The room froze as the truth landed. She'd weaponized zoning to target me while breaking the very same law herself. Her authority cracked like wet plaster, face flushing through 6 shades of shame. "This is absurd," she exploded.
"I'm trying to protect our property values from his police compound." "You mean the arrangement that brings county law enforcement through here twice a week?" asked board member Patricia Walsh sweetly. "The one that probably cut our insurance premiums?" The meeting collapsed faster than a sandcastle in a storm. Brenda stormed out, demanding real legal action and leaving her violation notice behind like toxic waste. The remaining board voted 4-0 to dismiss every charge against me and even issued Brenda a formal citation for her truck violations. Walking back to my truck, I savored victory in the cool evening air, laced with the faint tang of her diesel exhaust. But glancing toward her kitchen window, I caught her pacing furiously, phone pressed to her ear, no doubt speed dialing every lawyer and city official she could conjure. By the next morning, my suspicion was confirmed. Her trucks were deliberately positioned to block my property. She had her trucks positioned to partially block my mailbox access. Not technically illegal, but irritating enough to send a message loud and clear. By noon, the city had received an anonymous complaint about excessive dog barking from my property. Rex hasn't barked excessively since he was a pup, but in a harassment campaign, truth doesn't matter. Round 1 to Dale. But Brenda wasn't slowing down. Her embarrassment at the HOA meeting lasted only 48 hours before she escalated to City Hall. Friday morning, I found a certified letter from Millfield City Planning, weighed down with so many official seals it looked like it came from the Supreme Court. The complaint claimed my sheriff's lease had created an unauthorized quasi-commercial district that violated neighborhood preservation codes. It even included color photos of Deputy Martinez's patrol car, gear drop-offs, and me speaking with county staff in my driveway. Clearly, someone had been very busy with a telephoto lens. The letter cited Municipal Code Section 8.4 regarding neighborhood character and summoned me to a planning commission hearing in 2 weeks. But one detail jumped out, filed by concerned residents, processed by Jennifer Walsh of the planning office. That name rang a bell. Patricia Walsh from the HOA board had mentioned her daughter worked downtown. In small towns, everything is family business, and apparently Jennifer had inherited her mother's sense of fairness. I decided to visit her before the hearing. The city planning office reeked of industrial carpet and dashed hopes, buried in the basement of a concrete building designed by someone who hated windows. Jennifer was a tired-looking woman in her 30s who avoided my eyes like I was contagious. "Mr. Hensley," she said nervously, fiddling with her papers, "I assume you're here about the zoning complaint." "I'm here for the truth," I said, settling into a chair that creaked like old bones. "I've been wondering how someone filed with such precise legal phrasing and perfect timing." Her cheeks flamed scarlet. "I can't discuss active cases," she muttered. "Fair enough. But while I'm here, maybe you can help me understand something about home business permits."
The night before, I'd pored through municipal codes until my eyes burned, the kind of homework Sarah would have admired. Turns out, operating a landscaping business from home requires permits, especially if you're parking commercial vehicles or meeting clients at the address. Brenda's business registration listed her house as her headquarters, but she had never filed for a home occupation permit. That's like leaving your front door unlocked while complaining about burglars. Hypothetically, I continued, sliding printed statutes across the desk, what happens when someone runs a business from residential property without those permits? Jennifer scanned the paperwork, her composure collapsing like a card tower in a storm. "These trucks, how much do they weigh?" she asked weakly. "Over 12,000 pounds apiece. Both registered as commercial. Both parked overnight. No permits," I answered, savoring every word. The irony was delicious. Brenda was weaponizing zoning codes while violating them herself. "And there's something else," I added, producing photos from her infamous barbecue. Client consultations, landscaping estimates, design meetings, even payments collected at her house. All of it business activity in a residential zone. Jennifer stared like the evidence might ignite in her hands. "Mr. Hensley, this puts me in a difficult position." "I'm not asking you to bend anything," I assured her. "I'm just saying the Planning Commission deserves the whole truth before they rule on residential character preservation." 2 weeks later, the hearing chamber was packed shoulder to shoulder. Brenda strutted in with a briefcase and a chip on her shoulder big enough to block traffic. Her husband Chuck dragged along from moral support. He looked like he'd rather be in a fist fight with wild hogs than sitting there.
Mr. Hensley's so-called commercial lease fundamentally alters the residential character of our neighborhood, Brenda declared, theatrically consulting her stack of notes. "We have documented proof of increased—" She launched into her presentation with the swagger of a prosecutor who knew the jury was already in her pocket, insisting my property brought traffic, commercial vehicle activity, and unlawful business operations. Each photograph she presented was carefully framed to make my arrangement look like a full-scale truck depot. When my turn came, I rose slowly for dramatic effect. "Commission members," I began, "Mrs. Thompson is absolutely right about protecting neighborhood character. That's why I was shocked to uncover her own violations of the very codes she cites. I laid out my evidence step by step. Brenda's unlicensed home business, her oversized commercial trucks parked in residential zones without permits, and her client meetings held on her property. Everything she accused me of doing, she was guilty of herself, only worse. The best part was Jennifer Walsh had done her homework after our chat, and the commission already had Brenda's violations documented in a file sitting on the table." Chairman Robert Hayes cleared his throat with the weight of authority. "Mrs. Thompson, it appears you're operating a commercial landscaping business from your residence without the required permits." Brenda's smug smile melted like butter on asphalt. "That's completely different," she sputtered. Hayes pressed on. "Actually, Mr. Hensley's lease arrangement is properly filed and compliant, while your business operations are not." The commission voted unanimously to dismiss her complaint and issued her violation notices instead. Chuck, her husband, looked ready to sink through the floor. As I walked out of the hearing, the air smelled like victory mixed with Brenda's desperation. But I knew better than to think it was over. Being humiliated twice in 1 month would only push someone like Brenda to dangerous extremes. Sure enough, the next morning I found fresh scratches on my mailbox and an insurance claim notice tossed in my driveway. Round 2 to Dale, but the game was far from finished. The notice accused Deputy Martinez's patrol car of scraping Brenda's fence during a pickup, demanding $3,500 in repairs plus compensation for emotional distress. I went to inspect the damage, Rex trotting beside me. The scratches were so fresh they still reeked of paint thinner, running in straight, deliberate lines exactly at bumper height.
Either Martinez had learned to drive through solid air, or someone had been faking damage with spray paint and a putty knife. "Morning, Dale," my neighbor Mildred called from her garden, trimming roses with surgical precision. At 78, she'd seen the subdivision evolve from farmland and had a memory sharper than her shears. "Saw some odd activity over at Brenda's last night," she said, narrowing her eyes. "She was working on that fence with some kind of can. Funny thing, I could swear the fence looked just fine when I walked by that afternoon." Mildred's Ring doorbell was practically the neighborhood's surveillance hub, and she suggested I check the video from around 6:30. I wasted no time contacting my insurance company. Investigator Carl Thompson had been busting fraudulent claims longer than I'd been repairing engines, and his voice carried the weary certainty of a man who'd seen every scam. "Mr. Hensley, we deal with about half a dozen staged claims every month. Most aren't pulled off well, which makes my job easy." He outlined the process: timeline checks, damage analysis, witness interviews, and of course, reviewing video. "People forget cameras don't lie," he said dryly. "What makes this one suspicious?" I asked, though I already had my doubts. "Well, for starters, she filed within 12 hours of the alleged incident, with polished photos and a repair estimate from a contractor conveniently sharing her business address. That's either miraculous efficiency or pre-planning. Carl showed up the next morning with gear that looked capable of photographing shadows. Under his scrutiny, the so-called damage told its own story. Too precise, too clean, and all applied from an angle no car could have made. These aren't impact marks," he explained. "They're handmade, probably with a scraper. See the uniform depth? Real vehicle collisions don't do that." Then came the knockout, Mildred's Ring footage. The camera caught Brenda at 6:47 p.m., carefully applying gray spray paint in neat horizontal strokes. The resolution was clear enough to read the Rust-Oleum label on the can, and the timestamp showed the damage happened long after Martinez had last been near the property. You could even hear Brenda muttering, as if rehearsing her story. When Carl confronted her, the change was instant. She went from bold accuser to panicked fraud suspect in seconds. "Mrs. Thompson," he said with practiced formality.
Calm. Insurance fraud is a felony with penalties including jail time and a permanent record. The color drained from her face until she looked like someone had unplugged her. "This is just a misunderstanding," she stammered. Brenda's eyes darted downward, suddenly unable to look anyone in the face. "I was just fixing some old damage," she muttered weakly. "The video shows you making damage, not repairing it," Carl replied coldly, flipping through his notes like a prosecutor reading charges. "You have 24 hours to withdraw this claim voluntarily, or we'll refer it for felony prosecution." By lunchtime, Brenda had quietly pulled the claim, but her reputation never recovered. In a town where gossip traveled faster than phone lines, word of her failed insurance stunt spread everywhere by nightfall. That humiliation cracked her marriage, too. I overheard Chuck's voice booming through their open kitchen window that evening, raw with exhaustion. "Brenda, this has to stop. Insurance fraud? I'm not going to prison because you can't stand losing an argument." His tone made it clear he was planning an exit strategy. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous, and Brenda was nothing if not cornered. The very next morning brought a fresh set of anonymous complaints. Rex accused of being vicious, followed by a sudden health department inspection notice claiming my property was unsanitary. With her official avenues failing, she was resorting to pure harassment. Round 3, Dale. But deep down, I knew this wasn't even close to the final round. The county tax reassessment letter showed up on a Tuesday that started ordinary and ended like a punch to the gut. According to Millfield County's bureaucratic jargon, they were performing routine updates on property values. Translation, they wanted more money and had picked their targets.
My little ranch house, which hadn't changed in decades, had somehow leapt 40% in value over 3 years, effectively doubling my tax bill from around $3,000 to nearly $6,000. With just a disability pension and Social Security trickling in, that new number was unpayable without the sheriff's lease income. Even with it, I'd be cutting things so close I'd need a microscope to see daylight. That's when the timing clicked. This wasn't routine at all. It was too perfectly lined up after Brenda's disasters at the HOA and Planning Commission. Assessments were usually countywide, but my notice named only 4 addresses, mine and 3 others on my street. All long-time residents, all retirees on fixed incomes, all conveniently dealing with recent HOA problems. The coincidence stank. Determined to get answers, I drove to the county assessor's office the next morning, a place that reeked of old carpet and despair. Janet, the overworked clerk, pulled up my file with the flat efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Your property was flagged based on a complaint about unauthorized commercial improvements, she explained, tapping highlighted sections of the report. Someone had claimed I'd converted my residential space into business use without permits. The complaint, though filed anonymously, was alarmingly specific. It referenced the sheriff's lease, supposed equipment storage, and alleged modifications that never happened. Someone had clearly done homework before trying to weaponize the tax system. Janet, I said evenly, though my chest burned with anger, that garage was built in 1987. Nothing's changed. It's the same damn structure it's always been. She frowned at her monitor. The report indicates recent improvements and increased utilization. Our assessor based the valuation on those. The system was functioning exactly as intended. Anonymous complaints triggered inflated valuations. Inflated valuations forced higher taxes, and higher taxes pushed people out of their homes. Cruel in its elegance, the scheme might have succeeded if not for one unexpected slip. Janet leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing gossip. You know, this complaint came through unusual channels. Most reassessment requests come from realtors or developers. This one was referred directly from city planning. My mind went straight to Jennifer Walsh, the planner who'd already shown cracks of guilt after Brenda's zoning stunt. I drove to City Hall immediately, where Jennifer sat waiting with the strained look of someone suffocating under a secret. "Mr. Hensley," she blurted before I could speak, "I need to tell you about that reassessment." She confessed Brenda had been pushing her to find creative ways to pressure certain homeowners, specifically the elderly and disabled, who couldn't afford long battles. The reassessment wasn't random. It was the knockout punch Brenda hoped would bankrupt me and the sheriff's lease and pry open an opportunity to scoop up my property. Jennifer's voice dropped even lower. She's asked about others, too. Mrs. Patterson on Elm, the Rodriguezes on Oak.
Same story, longtime residents suddenly drowning in HOA complaints. The pattern was undeniable. Brenda wasn't fighting neighbors, she was running a systematic displacement campaign, using bureaucracy as a crowbar to pry people out of their homes. But guilt had driven Jennifer to one brave act. She pushed a manila envelope across her desk. I copied everything before I realized how wrong it was, her requests, complaint details, even emails about investment opportunities. I can't undo the reassessment yet, but this might help. Walking back to my truck, the puzzle pieces clicked together in a way Sarah would have solved instantly. This was bigger than me. It wasn't personal harassment, it was predatory business. Brenda had mapped out weaknesses, exploited rules, and launched a hostile takeover one house at a time. Unfortunately for her, she'd misjudged the one man who kept records like case files and had friends in law enforcement. Time to move from defense to offense. That envelope felt like dynamite in my hands, and dynamite only works if you know how to aim it. I needed backup. And in small towns, backup doesn't come from strangers, it comes from people who've been watching out for each other since before Brenda was born. My first stop was the legal aid office in the courthouse basement, a cramped room that smelled like burnt coffee and unshakable resolve. Attorney Rebecca Martinez, sister of Deputy Martinez, specialized in elder abuse and property rights. She sifted through Jennifer's documents with the precision of a surgeon reading x-rays. "This isn't neighbor drama," she said flatly. "This is systematic harassment for financial gain." She spread the pages like a battle map. Classic predatory playbook. Identify vulnerable owners in prime locations, drown them with HOA fines and city violations, escalate the pressure until they fold. If they don't sell cheap, force tax liens and seize the property. Textbook case. Rebecca called it classic predatory behavior, but she admitted the amount of documentation we had was unusually strong. Most victims never realize what's happening until the trap is already sprung. She laid out a strategy. Document every incident, file harassment complaints across multiple agencies, and prepare both civil and criminal actions. But the key, she insisted, was to broaden the fight. Predators like Brenda rarely stop with just one victim. If we can connect her harassment to others, the authorities can't dismiss it as neighbor drama. They'll see a pattern. My next stop was Mildred's place, where her so-called afternoon tea turned out to be a war council in disguise. 3 other longtime residents sat around her kitchen table, each with their own recent run-ins. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street had suddenly been hit with noise complaints about her aging AC unit. The Rodriguez family on Oak Avenue was fending off claims of unauthorized storage for their single work truck. And Frank Morrison, our retired postmaster, had been cited for excessive lawn ornaments, meaning his harmless collection of gnomes that had decorated his yard for 15 years. Mildred poured coffee like a field marshal, shaking her head. Every single complaint in the past 6 months has gone after people who've been here longer than Brenda's sidewalk. The pattern, once you saw it, was impossible to miss. Deliberate harassment meant to push out established homeowners and free up cheap property. Frank had done some digging of his own, combing through HOA minutes since Brenda joined the board. She's been requesting data on property values, length of ownership, even financial hardship cases, he explained, adjusting his glasses. She even asked for a list of residents over 65, said it was for community outreach. In reality, she'd been compiling target lists like a general planning a campaign. Mrs. Patterson, sharp as ever after decades of teaching teenagers, had caught Brenda photographing homes when owners were gone, measuring driveways, even peeking into mailboxes for mortgage company envelopes. Her reconnaissance was as calculated as a military op, designed to strike at the most vulnerable moment. So we decided to fight back with what Mildred politely branded enhanced neighborhood communication. Every incident would be logged with timestamps and photos. Frank would monitor HOA meetings and leak early warnings about incoming complaints. Mrs. Patterson would coordinate with other affected families and share legal contacts. I'd be the main bridge to law enforcement and Rebecca at Legal Aid. But our strongest weapon turned out to be the wider community that had been quietly watching. Small-town businesses depend on stable neighborhoods, and Brenda's antics were starting to look like a threat to everyone's bottom line. Tony Castellanos, who ran the hardware store and supplied Deputy Martinez, volunteered to keep an eye out for suspicious purchases. She was in here last week asking about security cameras and
Motion sensors, he reported. Said she needed to monitor property line violations. Didn't sit right with me, so I told her we were sold out. Maria Santos, who ran the diner, had overheard Brenda during lunch meetings with contractors and real estate agents. She talks about development opportunities and improvements, Maria explained. Sounds a lot like flipping plans. She even dropped specific addresses and asking prices. By sundown, we had assembled what Rebecca later nicknamed the skeleton of a neighborhood task force. It was the most thorough harassment file anyone on the team had seen. Video clips, witness accounts, bank and billing records, and, most damning, proof that Brenda had been systematically preying on the neighborhood's most vulnerable people. We had enough evidence to open cases with the county sheriff, the district attorney, the state real estate commission, and the federal housing authority. But paper only matters if you intend to deploy it wisely. Rebecca arranged meetings with the relevant law enforcement offices for the next week, while I readied myself for what would likely be Brenda's loudest, most reckless retaliation. A trapped predator rarely gives up calmly. They often escalate into more hazardous, brazen acts. Our coalition braced itself. We were about to find out how far Brenda would push to shield her schemes. Her panic showed in sloppy, increasingly obvious attacks that signaled running out of options. The morning after our strategy session, I found motor oil splashed across my driveway overnight, a slick, reeking mess that would cost hundreds to remove. The timing was deliberate. Deputy Martinez was due for his weekly equipment inspection that afternoon, and maneuvering that greasy patch would be both unsafe and humiliating. Brenda had, however, already made a tactical misstep. Motor oil doesn't vanish, and a trail of droplets tracked from my driveway to the storm drain and then in a suspicious line toward her property. Even more telling, the oil matched the heavy-grade lubricant used in landscaping machinery, the type that carries distinctive additive markers when analyzed. I phoned Rebecca at once. She got environmental services out to document and sample the spill. Illicit disposal of petroleum products carries severe penalties, especially where municipal waterways might be affected. The vandalism continued through the week in an almost amateurish way that would have been funny if it weren't so vicious. My mailbox post was loosened until it leaned toward the street. Someone cut my garden hose in 3 places, flooding the side yard and killing Sarah's treasured roses. Rex's water bowl was contaminated with a bleach-like stench, prompting an emergency vet visit that confirmed a chemical poisoning attempt. We captured each event with photos, timestamps, and neighbor statements, people who were now vigilantly watching for anything odd. The sequence of incidents illustrated Brenda's desperation and eroding judgment. She'd abandoned subtle bureaucratic harassment for crude, traceable vandalism. Mildred's Ring cameras recorded shadowy figures moving through our yards after midnight, always coming from Brenda's direction. The footage wasn't sharp enough for a positive ID, but the timing and patterns were piling up into a strong circumstantial case. Frank Morrison, monitoring HOA business, found more. Brenda had been forging board letterhead to lodge bogus complaints with multiple city departments. Noise, health code, alleged dumping, all aimed at the same longtime residents. By masquerading as official HOA correspondence, she weaponized municipal processes against her targets. That level of deceit pushed the campaign into serious criminal territory. The turning point came when Mrs. Patterson's security system captured Brenda on camera damaging property. The retired teacher had installed motion-activated cameras after her AC unit was vandalized, and Tuesday night's footage. The footage showed Brenda plainly trying to unplug the electrical hookups to the outdoor unit. The clip was courtroom ready, timestamps, a clear facial profile, and evidence of trespass and attempted property damage. But her gravest mistake was disrupting emergency responders. Thursday morning, a house fire broke out 3 blocks away when Mrs. Morgan's kitchen ignited during breakfast, filling the home with thick, hazardous smoke. When firefighters arrived, they found newly placed construction barriers blocking their usual access. Those barriers hadn't been there the day before. Crews were forced to drag hoses an extra 100 yards, costing vital minutes while an elderly woman's life hung in the balance. Fire Chief William Torres was livid after learning the barriers had been put up without permits or any notice to emergency services. Someone intentionally obstructed emergency access during an active response, he told the emergency city council meeting. This is more than vandalism or
harassment. It's criminal endangerment that could have killed someone. The barriers were traced back to deliveries from Brenda's regular supplier, placed where they would specifically impede emergency access to the neighborhood we'd been defending. Interfering with emergency services pushed the matter past a civil dispute and into criminal investigation territory. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez filed a formal report with the county prosecutor outlining the escalating pattern of harassment, property destruction, and public safety interference. "This goes beyond neighbor quarrels," he said in his statement. "We're seeing organized criminal activity intended to coerce property sales through intimidation and sabotage." Local reporter Sarah Kim began digging after Chief Torres's public remarks. Her early story, "Systematic Harassment Campaign Targets Elderly Residents," brought regional scrutiny to Brenda's tactics and triggered calls from other towns facing similar predatory behavior. The coverage snowballed, and by Friday night, Brenda's landscaping business was hemorrhaging clients as word of her alleged crimes spread. Chuck's truck was often missing from their driveway, and neighbors overheard angry conversations about lawyers, divorces, and looming bankruptcies. The pressure was finally fracturing the life she'd tried to wreck for others. But a trapped predator is at its most dangerous when cornered. Saturday morning, I found an envelope slid under my door containing photographs of my daily routines, Rex's walking times, and shots apparently taken through my kitchen window. The implied threat was unmistakable. If lawsuits couldn't drive me out, intimidation might. It was time for the final confrontation. We had the evidence, the community behind us, and legal teams ready to act. Sunday dawned with a strange, watchful quiet, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder. I was refilling Rex's bowl when Brenda showed up at the back gate, wearing what she clearly hoped was a convincing disguise of civility, pressed khakis and a tidy polo that screamed, "Reasonable person with a reasonable proposal." The act would have worked on a stranger, but after months of documenting her crimes, it rang hollow. "Dale," she purred with saccharine politeness, "could I have a word? I think we should clear the air about all these misunderstandings." She held a manila envelope fat enough to contain either legal papers or something far more sinister. Given her history, I assumed the latter. I hit record on my phone before opening the gate, a habit Rebecca had insisted on once we began building the case. Rex moved between us, alert and watchful. "What do you want, Brenda?" I asked, keeping my voice even as she launched into a clearly rehearsed pitch about resolving things without lawyers or courtrooms. She opened the envelope and withdrew a wad of cash thick enough to choke a horse. "I'm prepared to give you $20,000 in cash to terminate your arrangement with the sheriff's department voluntarily. Clean break, no hard feelings, everybody wins." The aroma of fresh bills mixed with her desperation in a way that almost made my head spin. $20,000 was more cash than I'd seen in one place since Sarah's life insurance payout, and Brenda clearly understood how tempting that sum would be for someone juggling rising property taxes and legal fees. She'd done her homework before making the offer. "That's generous," I said, careful to let her keep sinking the rope. "But why would you want me to end an agreement that helps the whole community?" She leaned in with the intensity of someone laying down a final play. "Between you and me, Dale, I've got big plans for this neighborhood. Development opportunities that could benefit everyone, but they require some adjustments to the current situation." There it was, the admission Rebecca had been angling for. Brenda had just described a deliberate scheme to manipulate property values and push out longtime residents to make way for development. "What kind of development?" I asked, keeping her talking while the recorder captured every incriminating syllable. "Your corner lot has massive commercial potential," she said, warming to the pitch like a salesperson closing a deal. "Prime location, infrastructure already there, easy access for delivery trucks. With the right improvements, it could be worth 3 times what you paid." She paused for effect. "Of course, that would mean removing certain complications that stand in the way of proper development." The bribe was textbook criminal behavior, and she wasn't done digging. "If you're not interested in this generous settlement," she continued, voice hardening, "things could get very difficult. I have people at City Hall, County Planning, even the State Real Estate Commission. Folks who can make life unpleasant for someone who won't be reasonable about legitimate business."
That blurred the line from bribery into extortion, and I could almost
decided to deploy every weapon in her arsenal for maximum psychological destruction before the evening's final battle. At 7 a.m., I discovered her master stroke. She'd attempted to have me arrested before the meeting could even happen. Sheriff Martinez stood on my front porch holding a complaint warrant, his weathered face wearing the expression of someone who'd been dragged into neighborhood drama against his better judgment. "Mr. Thompson, I have to ask you some questions about allegedly threatening phone calls made to Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his tone suggesting he'd rather be investigating actual crimes than middle-aged neighbor disputes. "She claims you called her house Tuesday night, making statements about destroying everything she's worked for and making her pay for what she's done." The accusation was pure fiction, but brilliant in its simplicity. If I had actually made those calls, they could arrest me before the meeting and paint me as an unstable criminal. If I hadn't made them, which was the truth, it still planted seeds of doubt about my mental state and potential for violence. "Sheriff, I haven't called that woman once since this whole mess started," I said, pulling out my phone records that I'd learned to keep meticulously documented. "You're welcome to verify that with my phone company, but I think you'll find Mrs. Caldwell has a history of making claims that don't match reality." Martinez examined my call logs with the thoroughness of someone who'd learned to separate truth from hysteria through decades of police work. "These records show no calls to her number ever, ma'am," he said into his radio. "The complaint appears to be unfounded. We'll proceed with the meeting as scheduled, but I'll be present to ensure things stay civil." But Brenna's fabricated emergency call was just her opening gambit. By 10 a.m., she'd escalated to bringing in legal muscle that looked like it had crawled out of a television commercial. Her lawyer, a sweaty man in an ill-fitting suit named Bradley Pearson, arrived at the community center early to set up what he clearly believed would be my legal execution. Through the windows, I watched him arranging documents on a folding table like he was preparing for a court trial, complete with a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His presence was designed to intimidate me into surrender before I could present any defense. But Brenna had saved her most vicious attack for the hours leading up to our confrontation. She'd prepared a slideshow presentation that turned character assassination into an art form. Using my divorce records, employment history, and carefully edited photographs of my cabin, she'd crafted a narrative that painted me as an unstable drifter who posed a genuine threat to community safety and property values. "This individual has a documented history of conflict with authority figures," her presentation claimed, twisting my refusal to pay bogus HOA fees into evidence of antisocial behavior and contempt for community standards. Photos of my rustic cabin were captioned with phrases like structural neglect and potential safety hazard to neighboring families. The slides even included a mock financial analysis showing how my presence allegedly threatened everyone's property values, complete with fabricated statistics about non-compliant properties, reducing neighborhood worth by up to 20%. But while Brenna was busy preparing my public destruction, I was quietly assembling the evidence that would end her reign of terror permanently. My security cameras had captured something beautiful over the past week. Clear footage of Brenna herself trespassing on my property multiple times to take photographs for her slideshow. Video timestamps showed her walking 50 feet onto my land, past Dylan's bright orange boundary markers, to get the devastating cabin photos she planned to use against me. Even better, Garrett's financial investigation had uncovered the smoking gun that would destroy any sympathy she might receive. Bank records showed she'd been depositing HOA legal fund money into her personal account, then paying lawyers a fraction of what she'd collected while keeping the rest for what she documented as administrative expenses. Her corruption ran deeper than embezzlement. She'd been running a protection racket, threatening residents with expensive compliance actions unless they paid inflated fees that went straight into her pocket. Dylan had spent the morning creating a GPS-powered presentation that would demonstrate property boundaries in real time during the meeting.
His equipment could project exact boundary lines onto the community center walls, showing everyone precisely where their cars were parked relative to my property line. But our secret weapon was the growing coalition of neighbors who'd finally seen through Brenna's manipulation tactics. Sandra Thompson had organized
making criminal threats on clear audio. Fire Chief Torres stepped forward next, his voice tight with anger as he described the fire response at Mrs. Morgan's home. Life-saving equipment was deliberately obstructed during an active emergency, he said. Mrs. Morgan could have died, and we can tie those barriers directly to this harassment campaign. The mayor asked if Brenda wished to respond. Though her attorney urged silence, her ego demanded the spotlight. She strode to the microphone, brimming with false confidence, still clinging to the belief that wealth and influence could drown out evidence and outrage. This is a gross misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by people who resist positive change, she began, dripping condescension. I've only tried to raise property values and improve our neighborhood's character through legitimate business opportunities. That's when Frank Morrison rose from the back, his voice sharp as a blade. Brenda, we've got the HOA minutes where you called longtime residents obstacles to progress and laid out strategies to force turnover. We've got receipts for those emergency barriers. We've got video of you vandalizing property and polluting storm drains. His tone swelled with righteous fury. You tried to destroy this community for profit, and everyone here knows it. The chamber erupted in applause that thundered on for nearly 2 minutes. When Mayor Rodriguez finally restored order, she announced the council's unanimous decision to cooperate fully with prosecutors. This behavior has no place in Millfield, she declared. We defend our most vulnerable, not prey on them. County Prosecutor James Mitchell stepped forward with the solemn weight of justice. Mrs. Thompson, you are under arrest for attempted extortion, environmental crimes, obstruction of emergency services, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As Deputy Martinez read her rights, Brenda's facade shattered. Her lawyer was already muttering about plea deals as she was led away in handcuffs. The chamber erupted again. Relief, vindication, triumph. Chuck sat quietly in the back, his face betraying the relief of a man whose nightmare marriage was finally ending. Outside, Rex likely heard the cheers echoing from the parking lot. Justice had been served. The predator was gone. 3 months later, Millfield felt reborn. Or perhaps it was simply returning to the place it had always been, before Brenda's poison seeped into its spirit. Morning sunlight still fell through my kitchen window the same way, catching Sarah's coffee mug I still couldn't put away. But now I could sip in peace, no cameras watching, no dread of the next act of sabotage. Brenda's criminal trial was short. Faced with an overwhelming mountain of evidence, she pled guilty to extortion, environmental crimes, and emergency interference. The sentence, 18 months in county jail and 5 years probation. Her landscaping company collapsed overnight, and Chuck filed for divorce before she was even sentenced. The house next door was sold to a young couple, both teachers from Austin, who greeted the block with a plate of cookies, and they actually asked before borrowing my ladder, a small gesture that felt like the perfect symbol of the changes in Millfield. The county officially approved my expanded lease the day after Brenda's arrest, bringing in an extra $1,000 a month. That not only covered the higher property taxes, but also gave me the financial stability I'd been missing since Sarah's passing. Deputy Martinez now shared garage space with the fire department's emergency gear and the county's new outreach coordinator, turning my property into an unofficial community safety hub, the very thing Brenda had once fought against. Ironically, it ended up raising property values across the neighborhood. The ripple effects went further than anyone expected. At a block party, the sheriff's department presented Rex with an honorary K-9 certificate.
Half the town showed up, the air filled with the smell of burgers on the grill and diesel from the fire truck that kids climbed like jungle gyms. Watching my German Shepherd proudly pose with real police dogs while wearing a crooked name tag might have been the highlight of my retirement. Frank Morrison won the HOA presidency in a landslide, running on transparency and service instead of harassment and intimidation. His first act, term limits and mandatory recorded meetings, ensuring no future Brenda could weaponize HOA politics. Now, the budget funded annual festivals and preparedness programs instead of legal fights. Rebecca Martinez expanded her practice using our documentation system as a model for elder harassment cases across Texas. Within months, she'd helped prosecute similar campaigns in half a dozen towns. Our local stand had grown into a statewide movement to protect vulnerable residents. Sometimes one person's decision to fight
shields thousands of others. The most meaningful change, though, came in daily life. Mildred's garden gatherings turned into weekly events where neighbors shared friendship instead of complaints. Mrs. Patterson started walking groups that doubled as wellness check-ins for retirees. The Rodriguez family opened their garage as a tool-sharing hub. My own contribution was the Sarah Hensley Memorial Scholarship, funded from my lease income, which supported students pursuing careers in teaching, social work, nursing, and law enforcement. The first award went to Maria Santos's daughter, bound for nursing school. Watching recipients graduate each year, I could almost hear Sarah's proud voice carried on the evening breeze. 6 months after Brenda's arrest, I was tending Sarah's restored roses when laughter drifted over from next door. The new neighbor's twin daughters had discovered Rex's soft spot for belly rubs and tennis balls, turning my once vigilant guard dog into the block's favorite babysitter. Their parents, both teachers drawn to Millfield by its renewed spirit, were already hosting parent-teacher planning sessions in their living room. That evening, standing in my driveway as those little girls played dress-up with Rex, I realized something Sarah would have treasured. Communities aren't destroyed by predators, they're strengthened when ordinary people choose to protect one another. The smell of barbecue smoke mingled with laughter and Rex's happy sighs. This was what home was meant to sound, smell, and feel like. Your turn now. Drop a comment with your own HOA horror story or neighborhood nightmare. You don't have to fight these battles alone. Your neighborhood has more strength than you might think. Be sure to subscribe to HOA Stories for more real accounts of everyday people standing up to unfair systems, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new justice story. Remember, nothing exposes community bullies faster than shining a light on their actions. From all of us at HOA Stories, thank you for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors hold their ground and karma finally catch up, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be ready for the next HOA drama we uncover.